Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the Jews was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Cross the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, Alaska. Welcome to Oversight Live. I am Ben Carpenter, your host for this evening. Boy, is there a lot going on in Alaska right now. What's Oversight Live before we get started? Well, I created Oversight Live a while back to create a virtual road to Juneau until we can build a physical one. Alaska knows that it's cost prohibitive, both time and money, to get to Juneau. You got to fly or you got to take a ferry. And that means it's hard for us to provide oversight and watch and physically understand what's happening in our legislature and around our government. But a lot of our government is broadcast. And I had a conversation a number of years ago that said, hey, we ought to have somebody that just helps people understand and see what's going on down in Juneau. And lo and behold, now I've got the opportunity. So if you've got questions about what we're going to review tonight, which is a couple committee meetings, if you've got questions, just put them right in your chat window there on your streaming app. We're streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and X. And if you've got a question, you drop it in your chat and send it to me, and I'll get it to you live. If you are watching the recording and you have a question, you can send an email to me, and I'll do my best to answer your question via email, or if we need to, I'll bring the question back live and we'll have a conversation about it. Don't be surprised if I use your question, because the whole point here is to edify Alaskans, to increase the knowledge base of the voters and know more about our government. If I can help by answering your questions on air, that's great, because if you've got the question, it's likely somebody else has got the same question. So anyway, tonight's going to be a little different than we've ever done in the past. I've invited a very, very special guest to come on and have a conversation with us about a couple of different things. And this is the first time having a guest on my show. And so I'm hoping this is going to work right. So that's the thing that we want to watch. But this is the, click on the right there. There we go. Rob, I want the bigger thing there. Senator Robb Myers is with us, and he's going to watch and comment with us on a couple of committee meetings that happened today. Both Senate Finance and House Finance met, and so he's going to share his thoughts. Good evening, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing all right, Ben. Yeah, it's been a little nutty day. Of course, today being the filing deadline and stuff. So a couple of important committee meetings. I sat through both of them, not both in person, because House Finance is doing their thing in Anchorage and I'm here in Juneau right now. But sat through Senate Finance this morning and then watched House Finance on the computer, like others may or may not be doing.
And it wouldn't matter whether you were in Juneau or whether you were home back in district, you could be doing the same thing. And probably there are I guess I should ask, how many legislators are in Juneau? Not the House Finance people, because they're in Anchorage right now, but how many non-finance members are actually in Juneau?
So we've got 10-ish senators in town right now. Of course, 7 others are finance members. House members, I think pretty much everybody has cleared out. You've got, because they moved finance to Anchorage, so there wasn't a whole lot of point in many of them sticking around. I saw the Juneau reps walking around the building today, but I believe that they're the only ones here at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of what I thought. And I went out on a limb and suggested to the viewers a couple shows ago that that's likely what was going to happen. Now, nobody's going to stick around Juneau unless they have to. Rather be home with the family. Yes. Yeah. Awesome. So I noticed that your name was not on the Division of Elections candidates list.
Yeah.
I'd heard a rumor, but I guess it's official now. You are not going to be seeking re-election.
No, I'm not. So I've been thinking about this for a couple of months, real hard. And what became clear to me over the last 3 months here is that really my kids need me home more is what it boils down to. My oldest is 14. She just got her permit, and so I need to teach her to drive this summer. My youngest is 6. I was having a conversation with my wife last night, and I realized that she doesn't know me doing anything besides this, really, that and, driving truck, because I filed the paperwork to run for office a month after she was born. And so I am realizing that I need to be home for my kids more. They're hitting some critical ages. And so it's time for me to take a break. And, the next decade of my life or so, I'm not trying to pull away from politics, but I do need to pull away from Juneau. So it's hard to be a long distance dad for 4 months a year. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, Rob, that there is life after legislative service.
Are you sure? Because you don't seem to have gotten away from it.
Yeah. Well, I guess in a way this is service. It certainly is not paying better than it was as a legislator, but, I'm still involved, right? I still care about the state, and the concept of leadership as influence, just finding another way to influence, maybe only just a handful of people who are watching, who knows, but at least you can present your thoughts in this format. And if nothing else, your kids and grandkids and their kids will have some kind of record about what their grandfather stood for. So when we fall off that cliff, they can say, well, don't blame us, because he tried to tell you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway. All right. Well, I have teed up the tail end of the Senate Finance Committee meetings for one particular reason tonight. There's a commonality between Senate resources, to some extent House resources, and now the finance meetings. There's a claim that we need more information. So I'm trying to answer the question for myself and for others with facts, right? About what's driving this narrative within the committee meetings of we need more information. Okay. I'm going to key this up here, and we'll hear what Senator Stedman has towards the end of this meeting, and then we'll kind of discuss it.
Told that Great Bear and Pantheon was going to be the gas supply, and some of us thought that was nothing but hot air because they're not bankable. They don't have any gas. You can't go to the bank and borrow $8 billion and put down, who's going to put down the $3 billion in cash when there's nobody on the other end to put any gas in it? It's just ridiculous. So I'm glad that the conversations the last couple of months have moved off of that and are centered around where we do have gas, Point Thompson and North Star. So they are deliverable. So that's a positive, but it doesn't build confidence in the proposal when we get bamboozled like on such a fantasy for gas supply. So I'm not directing it at, I'm looking at you, but I'm not directing it at the department. It's to Glenfarne and AGDC. I'm glad we moved beyond that. And then I'm a little concerned on the modeling. If we're stuck with an in-state gas line, and I'm no gas guy, but talking to a few of the gas guys that spent their whole career building gas lines, they're always concerned about cost overruns, and the other one was sizing the pipe. Too big, you can go broke. Too small, it's not efficient. And they're concerned about building the correct size pipe. And the guys I talked to, they spent their whole life building them in Texas and New Mexico. But this pipe at 42 inch would be somewhere around 8 or 10% capacity. How could we get at some point, hopefully we get a more accurate cost estimate, but the actual, just a high level cash flow model, how much does a debt cost per year? What's the total that can be generated out of selling to the rail belt, the gas, and what's their debt coverage ratio would be? Some of the real high level underwriting numbers. I'd like to see those, because I just have a hard time getting comfortable if we're stuck with a 42 inch line at 8 or 10% capacity. And the folks, even though I don't live there, the folks in the rail belt are stuck with the bill. Somebody's going to have to pay that debt service. So anyway, could maybe you could help with that, Mr. Stickle, at rough ideas, and just use the 20-year government bond rate plus 3/8. Okay,
so Rob, I've got a. We heard questions from Senator Stedman, or statements really, that he's looking at gas availability, he's looking at size of pipeline, questioning whether it's the right size. Makes a statement about needing confidence in the proposal, right? The bill and the question before the legislature right now is one of a tax policy. Do we reduce the current property tax or restructure it into a volumetric tax or some other fashion, right? That's what the project is asking for, or not, right? I don't, like, is it the legislature trying to validate the project right now? Is that kind of the sense that you get with the questions that are being asked?
I think that's half of it. And then the other half of it is talking about state revenue and whether it's unintended consequences or whether it's just, consequences that we know are going to happen, but we're going to sweep under the rug. Or maybe somebody's trying to say not important, it's really those two things. It's number one, is this viable? Is this actually going to happen? Is some people's question. I think that's a lot of Senator Stedman's questions are directed that direction. You saw a lot of that in Senate Resources too, that, when I was in Senate Resources for 36 meetings on this bill, a lot of the questions were about either was this project viable, or do we even want this project, or do we want something else to happen instead? Do we want imports, for example, which is really the only viable long-term solution. You can pull a little bit more out of Cook Inlet, but that's going to run out here, and even with rising prices, they're going to run out here soon. So it's a question of is the project viable, or are we just getting sold a bill of goods? And then about state revenue. So you saw there was a couple of questions in there in finance today about, if we start selling the gas, what effect does that have on oil production? Because oil is much more valuable than gas. So do we end up losing some value? What's the trade-off there? And of course, that varies day to day based on prices. There's some concern about whether state revenue starts going negative and going down. In the short term, we're pretty sure some of that's going to happen because they have to build a couple of feeder pipelines and some things like that. Point Thompson needs a big build out if we're actually going to use the gas off of Point Thompson. Hillcorp is in the middle of drilling the second ever producing well on Point Thompson. So if you actually want to produce at scale, you're going to have to drill a lot more wells there. Prudhow's got all the wells you'd ever want, but they're going to need a little bit more pipelines built. So
these questions about revenue with regard to a decline in oil are all questions that I think have probably been asked and answered a decade or more ago when we commissioned AGDC. Like, so this is the thing that I'm trying trying to understand and help others understand is the project that we're having, the conversation over the project that we have right now is not just a private developer coming to the state and saying, hey, the tax policy makes this project not feasible. And so we would like to have a concession on property tax so that we can make this private project feasible. That's kind of what the narrative is out there, but that's not really the whole picture. This is a project that the legislature commissioned and spent $1 billion on. This is our ask to find somebody to build a pipeline. And we had that conversation a decade or more ago when we created AGDC and put this whole plan in play, right? We said we want a pipeline. And at that point, we spent $1 billion. Now we've spent $1 billion to get that pipeline. Asking the question now about, well, if we build the pipeline, are we going to see a reduction in the price or in the revenue of oil? I mean, if that is a valid question to be asking at this point, then why did we spend $1 billion permitting a pipeline?
Well, remember that a dozen years ago or so, or even, go back to the Sarah Palin days, the AGEA stuff, 2007, 2008, we were at a very different place. When Sarah Palin was here, gas down in the lower 48 was, $7-8. Now it's $3. So we thought we were going to make a lot more money off of it. In 2014, when we were discussing the most recent version of this project prior to this, and when we created AGDC, we thought, oh, okay, we had the state budget was built on oil and gas back then, and now it's almost 2/3 built on the permanent fund instead. So it's a different scenario. 2013, 2014, we had solid Republican majorities in both bodies of the legislature. So you ended up with a different set of questions being asked. The state has shifted left. We have shifted our financial situation, and it leads to a different set of questions being asked in a lot of ways. And and again, of course, the piece that we ignore the most, how does this actually impact the economy? What does, gas to Alaskans actually means? Unfortunately gets thrown under the bus and forgotten or ignored by a lot of people. We're asking that question to some extent in finance because we're talking a lot about the phase 1 numbers and what that does for cost of gas down in South Central in particular. But, we're asking questions based on the environment that we're in, not just based on the nature of the project.
Well, I mean, I guess if building a pipeline causes oil to decline on the North Slope oil declines on the North Slope unless you drill a new well, right? Because as soon as you drill the well, it starts declining. So right. If the production in the current wells declines because you're pulling gas out and they can't use, or they would have to use something else for regasification or whatever. If the byproduct of that decision to use gas means we have less oil coming out, less condensate coming out, less more valuable resource coming out, then you're reducing the need, if you will, from a tax perspective or from a revenue perspective of the state. You're reducing the need for having that activity on the North Slope. I mean, I know that there are there's at least one political party that would like to see oil and gas go away on the North Slope. So looking long-term, if we're putting a gas line in play that then reduces the amount of oil, I can see where somebody might be thinking, well, we don't want to incentivize going away from oil, meaning it's a reduction. We would rather incentivize going after oil. I find that to be kind of a nonsensical argument, because as long as there's money to be made, somebody's going to be going after the oil. It's the fact that maybe there's political pressure that tries to prevent oil, but as long as the world is demanding oil and it's cost effective to get it off the North Slope, somebody's always going to want to do that because it's severely lucrative. Like, it's hugely lucrative. So I don't, if somebody's looking long-term and saying that if we build the pipeline, therefore we will lose revenue from oil, it doesn't seem to be a valid argument, because you can always drill more wells for oil. And I don't see how that becomes a valid argument for the question at hand today, which, if it's not a tax question, should we or shouldn't we adjust the taxes? But it's a question about the validation of the pipeline in itself. Are we even doing the right thing by building a pipeline? That seems to be a bad argument for why we wouldn't want the pipeline.
Well, I mean, what it boils down to is it has to do with the way the physics of the wells, really, because once you drill that well, you get oil and gas coming out at different pieces. And what we've been doing for 50 years almost now is we take the gas and we shove it back underground, and that increases the pressure, and you get more oil out that way. One of the things that we've talked about, especially with Point Thompson, is as you're doing that, you got to run compressors and pumps and all this other stuff. And to run all of those things, you do it by burning gas. And so at some point, as the oil is coming down, but the gas is coming up, you cross a point there. And where does that point cross at which, we've burned so much gas trying to get more oil out that we've lost the value of the gas. And we're better off now just piping off the gas cap. And if we want more pressure, then we need to pump something else in there, whether it's seawater or it's polymer beads or, a couple of the other things that they're trying up there. So from an abstract perspective, I can understand the question and it does make sense. But from a practical perspective, I don't think it does, for a couple of reasons. One, because the state needs the gas. And, we need the production not to sell, but we need the production to use within state. And number two, because we're getting to the point, and I've seen this come up in a couple of committee meetings recently, where we're realizing that there is so much gas up on the slope that once you tell all the producers, okay, now we got a way to sell both the oil and the gas, now it gives them an extra incentive to go out and do some more exploration. Whereas before it was, okay, we can sell the oil, but the gas is going to be a byproduct, a waste product, we know it's valuable, so we're going to make you shove it back down to the ground. We're not going to allow you to flare it like they do down in Texas, because we do want to sell it eventually. But this is the direction that we need to be going. We do have an aging field, and we have to respect that. And the biggest piece of evidence that we have an aging field is that the largest operator up there is no longer BP, it's Hillcorp, because this is what Hillcorp does. They come into older fields and they revitalize them, and they harvest out as much as they can.
Well, we have an old field not because there's not more oil up there. We have an old field because of politics.
That's partially it, yes. And we have not done as much exploration as could potentially have been done based on, oil tax policy and some other things over the years. Bill Armstrong, made another discovery on the east part of the field. What was that? About a year ago now, that sockeye well that he drilled. And, that could become the next Pica and Willow, because Bill Armstrong is the guy that found the Nanoshook formation that Pica and Willow are both based off of. And now, that was on the west side. Now he's doing the same thing on the east side. It's going to be a couple more years before we know for sure how large that field is that he's found. But there is more up there. The question is how much and what's the economics to get it out. And we're getting to the point where the gas line helps us with those economics.
And that's kind of what my takeaway was from listening to this is that you actually might see an increase in oil production out of Point Thompson specifically if you start taking gas out, which is the exact opposite of what the worry is from people who think that they're going to have less revenue. I just think that that's it's a bad argument for why we shouldn't do. And not only is it a bad argument, but it seems to be missing the point. Like the thing that is before us right now is what is the right tax policy for the project that the legislature already asked to get built. Right. We spent a decade trying to build it ourselves or find somebody to build it for us as the owner. And that never worked. Now we've got a 75% owner in Glenfarne. They're moving forward with a private ownership of this project, and they're asking for tax concession. The legislature should be worried about what? Whether the pipeline should be built or what's the right tax policy. That's what I think is confusing ourselves. And I saw it in resources, and I figured, hey, look, there's some ulterior motives here. I think they just don't want the gas line. Well, I'm not exactly sure that that's the same motivation in Senate Finance that I'm watching. I think it's something else, and I haven't really put my finger on it yet. But now we have a model. Now we've got DOR with their model, and it appears to me, and I'm just thinking of this in the context of bureaucracy. This is the way we've always done it in the legislature. We've got this model that we created, and now we have to validate our model. So we're going to go through all of the questions and all of the searching for data to validate our model, whether it matters or not to the tax policy question. We're going to go through that process. Is that accurate?
I think what we're looking at a lot of is questions about state revenue again. Now, back in Senate Resources, when we brought up questions of state revenue, it was, how the heck do we tax more out of the oil companies? And that is, and that's, pretty obvious motive. It's pretty obvious from the way the questions were being asked a lot of the time. In Senate Finance, I don't think that is entirely the case. In Senate Finance, it's talking about, okay, when they come in and, they raise equity shares to finance the pipe, how much is our share going to get diluted? How much do we think we're going to get that we're not actually going to get? We're focused on, how a little bit more about, what's the oil versus gas trade-off. We're focused on how much are we going to lose because the lease expenditures are going to get deducted off the oil taxes, and so I think what you see out of finance is, to some extent, what you'd expect out of a finance committee. They are focused on what does this do to the bottom line, and to some extent, that is a valid question, but it's being penny wise and pound foolish in a lot of ways. We're concerned that for 2 years we're going to lose $100 million each year, and ignoring the fact that if we can actually make this thing viable and make it work over the long run, in about 5 years we're going to be starting to collect roughly $800 million a year. So we're focused so much on the short term, and if we make less off of our equity share, we're forgetting, well, that's still better than making zero off of an equity share of a project that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I guess I come back to this whole this thought about a company coming to the legislature and asking for a tax break, and we're not really, while that is what is happening, that's not really the whole. Like the state, like we intended to build a gas line all along. That's why we spent $1 billion on it. But the legislature is not choosing between multiple competing projects or competing developers, right? They're not. There's no alternative to Glenfarne that I know of. I mean, I know that there was some consortium that wanted of union-backed Bill Walker ideas that were kind of in the mix there for a little while, and then Glenfarne was given the go-ahead, right? But other than Glenfarne, there's not an alternative builder waiting, right? So the legislature can say, hey, Glenfarne, you want a 2 mil volumetric tax equivalent? Well, we've got this other company over here. They'll do it for 3 or 4 mil, and we don't even have to go away from a property tax, right? We're not having that conversation because there's no alternative for this pipeline that the legislature has already said they wanted. So what's that? Is the central question that they're asking, what's the smallest tax concession necessary for the project to move forward? Is that the question that they need to answer?
It's one of the questions that's being asked. It's definitely not the only one. Because they're trying to examine what does the entire project do to state revenue. And you keep bringing up, that 2013, 2014, we created AGDC, and so we clearly wanted the line. You got to remember that in the budget that we passed in 2024, they put a piece in there that said, you're going to figure out if this thing is going to go, and you've got a year to figure it out. Otherwise, we're winding down AGDC. We're shutting you down. We're going to mothball the whole thing. So again, I go back to things have changed in the last 10, 12 years. The actual appetite or interest in getting a gas line in large part, I think, has gone down compared to where we were in 2014. So, we can't necessarily rely on, well, we made this decision, so far back. You saw it in Senate Resources. The question was, did we make the right decision in how we structured AGDC in 2014? And people were trying to say, no, the legislature needs more control, needs more power, needs more information over this whole thing. And, the entire point of AGDC was to say, let's take the politics out of it and leave it up to some folks that we're going to pay just, we're going to make this your mission in life, and that's it. So,
if a concession on a gas line reduces the tax revenue in the oil industry, then the answer should be from the legislature, I guess we're going to scuttle the project and not have a gas line, because while you might make more revenue, small amount, 2% volumetric tax on a gas line, you lose a larger amount in oil production. That's the argument that somebody's trying to make. Therefore, we don't need the pipeline because that's going to make that's a net loss.
Right. Well, let me address a question that's in the chat room here too. Frank is saying, why do boroughs give tax breaks for new housing? Equating that to giving a tax break to this pipeline to get it going. I 100% agree there. But let's remember that what a borough is doing when it gives a temporary tax break to new housing, not only does it encourage new housing, but it puts something on the tax rolls that later on they're going to tax and get some more money off of, because they care about the broader economy. We don't largely care about the broader economy, especially because now we've got the permanent fund going. So if we lose money on the oil, but we don't, we can ignore the broader effect of cheaper energy on the economy as a whole, because that's not what the state makes money off of. So why do we care? We've had the municipalities come in here and testify to the finance committees over the last couple of weeks, and they do testify. They say, hey, look, we know that eventually this is going to bring us some more tax revenue because property valuations are going to go up. Hopefully, we start building some more things. In Kenai, in particular, is looking forward to bringing in a couple hundred people to actually run the LNG plant long term. After the construction is over with. So we're hoping and expecting all these things happen, but they're concerned about some short-term impacts, and I think that's just somewhat valid. But the state is looking at it and saying we don't really get the long-term impacts except for the sales of the gas itself. And if the sales of the gas itself is
reduces
not
revenue.
As much money, if it reduces revenue, then that's the incentive that we're given.
So I guess the question that's really being asked is Alaska better off with the project and the concession, or without both? I mean, if you don't build a project, it doesn't matter what your tax rate is.
Yeah, exactly. And so it really doesn't matter. So, does the state, this is one more case where we've got this disconnect between the state economy and the state government. If the best thing to come out of this is not just short-term construction jobs, but long-term jobs, long-term lower energy costs, things like that. That, of course, is great for the state economy, but the state government doesn't care about that because that's not where our money comes from. And we run into this problem. And that's why I wrote an article about it 3 weeks ago or something.
So I suppose that tomorrow we'll probably get into the actual modeling in Senate Finance, because the committee ended here without diving into the model. But I wonder if the model is going to model the impacts to the economy. Like, I don't think it will. I'm just going out on a limb here, because the legislature and the Senate is not going to care. I mean, if their decisions are 100% financial in nature, budgetary in nature, then growing the economy is not something that matters unless it's the oil economy, which is actually what they're having the conversation about. Is this going to diminish our oil revenue or increase it? So, well, I don't know.
I asked that question of Department of Revenue back in Resources too. I said, hey, could you give us some modeling on some of this? And he said, we're working on a model for that. It's not ready. What was it? I think he said it's not ready for prime time. And and to some extent I can understand why, because up until now, the guy talking to us is our chief economist, But up until now, the only economics that our state government has needed to figure out is the economics of oil. We have not tried to figure out how the rest of the economy works. So, it's not his fault. He's doing the job in the position that he was given. But this is something that goes back 30, 40, 50 years. We don't talk about the economics of the rest of the state because that doesn't impact the state budget in the same way that the economics of oil does.
Yeah. Dean Barch in the chat room says legislature still equates tax revenue for the good of all Alaskans and does not think about the private sector or my freezing to death as a way, no way to heat my home. And I think that was kind of to your point earlier. I think that would be a good segue. Let's jump over to House Finance and listen for a little bit here as John Sims with Enstar has a conversation with the committee, and it's a rather lengthy one. I'm not sure whether we'll get through the whole thing or not, but there's some good tidbits here. Since we're talking about staying warm, and many people rely upon the gas supply, who better than John Sims to have a conversation about this? So let's jump over here and listen to John, who's the president of Enstar.
The president of Enstar.
That's what I thought. I saw CFO there, and I thought, I think that might be wrong.
Well, my apologies for submitting the right information. Sometimes I wish I was a financial officer. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I wanted to just provide some initial thoughts on Enstar and where we currently sit as far as gas supply. And then I'll specifically get into some of the contract terms that we have with Glenfarne today. So kicking off, I wanted to provide some foundational information about gas supply. It's really a component of three main things. The first off is annual supply. You have to have the annual volumes available to your customers. You have to have deliverability, and then you have to have the balance sheet to move forward with the infrastructure and for the capital investments that are required to actually go out and find the gas. So this is a historical look back at Cook Inlet annual production. You can see in the heydays of Cook Inlet back in the 90s, we were up over 300 BCF per year. So how does that relate to Enstar? Enstar on an annual basis right now today, depending on temperatures, is anywhere from 33 to 38 BCF. So we used to be a small fraction of what we were able to get out of the Cook Inlet, or what the producers were able to get out of the Cook Inlet back in the early 90s. As you fast forward to 2026, you can see that the annual gas production has dropped to about 70 BCF, which is one of the reasons why we're having some of the challenges we are today. As I mentioned, gas supply is a function of three different things. We first touched on the annual volumes. The second chart is showing the daily gas production that comes from Cook Inlet. This is a little bit different time frame. We're starting this one from 2010, and you can see that we've dropped from about 350 million a day down to around 200 million a day. One of the reasons why that's important, and we'll get into that in the next slide, is in the winter months, Enstar has to be prepared to deliver up to 320 million a day. So what's being produced out of Cook Inlet today by itself isn't enough to meet daily demand for customers in the wintertime. And this chart here, this is directly showing that daily demand. There's a couple things starting off on the left. You can see that red line going across the top. That is our design day peak of 320 million a day. So assuming worst case scenario and temperatures in Anchorage were at a sustained 25 below zero in the wintertime, that's where we would expect that peak to hit. The gray charts that are going up and down, that's a reflection of the numbers that are presented over to the right, which are kind of various examples of weather variances from warmer temperatures to colder temperatures. And then the solid orange down there on the bottom is HEA, or Homer Electric's load. They are a gas sales customer of Enstar's, so we procure gas on their behalf directly with the producers. That chart on the right that you can see just really speaks to the variability that we have. So between a cold winter and a warm winter, or a cold year and a warm year, Enstar needs up to 7 BCF per year difference, depending on if it's warm or cold, which is quite a swing and something that's challenging for us to get out of the Cook Inlet, especially today. So this isn't the first time that we've been here. Back in 2009, when Marathon was still here in the inlet, we were once again having a hard time getting firm gas supply contracts from the producers. So Chugach, ML&P at the time, and Enstar hired Petrotechnical Resources of Alaska, PRA, to do a demand study to see what would have to happen in the inlet to make sure that we had gas starting from 2010 out until 2020. And just to quickly summarize this, PRA said that in order for the local producers to meet demand through 2020, there would have to be 185 new wells that were drilled between that time. And because of the significant drop in deliverability per well, it really makes it challenging. Back in the old days where you saw the big glut of natural gas in the 90s, that was the result of large reservoirs that had large pools of gas. We don't have that today. They're getting smaller and smaller, and that's that significant drop in deliverability per well. They also estimated that about $1.8 to $2.8 billion in capital expenditures would be required to get to that 185 wells needing to be drilled. So the bottom line they concluded was, if we average about 13.6 wells completed per year, then the shortage of gas will occur some point after 2018. I highlighted the link there just so you guys, if you want to go back and reference that. It was a great report that PRA did. And another shout out to Pete Stokes, who did a fantastic job. So what's happened since then? This is information that was taken from Hillcorp's presentation to House Resources on January 28, 2026. And from 2012 to 2025, Hillcorp produced over 750 BCF of gas, and they drilled over 192 wells. So PRA was pretty spot on as far as the activity that would have to take place in order to meet Cook Inlet demand. They also spent about $1.5 billion in the Cook Inlet Basin alone. Now, this is just Hillcorp. It doesn't reflect some of the other producers that were out there over that time. We've had a number of them. We've had Buccaneer, Vision, Fury, of course, is doing work today, now called Hex. But the bottom line is they did the work necessary over 190 wells over a 10-year time frame, 13-year time frame, to make sure that we could meet Cook Inlet demand. This is another slide from Hillcorp. One of the things that you see here, again, the 192 wells, but look at the difference in what other producers did in the inlet compared to what Hillcorp did. Fury talks a lot, Hex, about being the second largest producer in Cook Inlet. What is that? Over that time frame, they did 14 wells. So not even the annual average over that time frame to get us to where we need to be. It's the function of the balance sheet and the ability to carry forward that capital expenditure that's required in order to get gas to the market.
I think it would be a good segue here, although this is not what the briefing is about here. What is necessary in order to make that happen, right? Your producers have got to be able to make money. So if you're going to limit them, that's exactly right. If you're wanting them to drill more wells, you can't expect them to do that and keep the price the same, because it costs more to go find it, right? So we've shot ourselves in the foot through the RCA of keeping our price down, but now we don't have enough wells.
So, and along those lines, John's going to get to this a little bit later in the meeting, but you and I have talked about this a little bit, Ben, about what has happened, especially this last year, in terms of what the market price is for gas. So the various contracts that Hillcorp and the other producers have, well, mostly Hillcorp, with Enstar and then with the electric utilities, Chugach and MEA. Those contracts, the gas is between about $8.50 and $10 for an MCF. And, we've kind of been sitting around that range for a little while now. It's been slowly creeping up every year, and everybody's been feeling it as their gas bill has been creeping up every year, especially this last winter, how cold it was.
And electric bill.
And electric bill, right. Yeah. Fairbanks' electric bill. Oh boy. What happened this last winter, though, is Enstar at one point, I don't know exactly when in the winter, they were worried that they were not going to have enough gas to get through the winter because of how cold this last winter was. So they went to Hillcorp and said, hey, we need an extra half of a billion cubic feet, half a BCF. And instead of the $8 and change that they've been paying for it, we'll pay you 16. And Hillcorp initially told them no, because they were concerned about whether or not they were going to have enough cash, or excuse me, whether or not they were going to have enough gas to fulfill their contracts, not only to their other customers right now, but have enough gas in the wells and in storage to fulfill their contracts this coming winter. And so a few weeks went by, and Hillcorp did some other math, realized that they could make it. Enstar came back and made them the same offer, half a BCF at $16. And Hillcorp said yes. And they gave them the extra half a BCF. A few weeks later, Enstar is still concerned because of how cold the winter was, and asked for a 1.5 BCF. So 2 BCF a year, 2 BCF for the winter over and above what they already contracted for, and said, again, we'll pay you $16. And Hillcorp told them no, because they were worried they were not going to have the supply to take care of that. So the market price, even though we've been paying, between $8.50 and $10, depending on the contract, for gas for a little while now, the market price is already at 16. And when we talk about what the price is going to be, either for imports or what the price is going to be for gas going to utilities in phase 1 of the gas line, we need to keep that in mind, because that's what you're competing with. It's not, oh, well, the gas price is 8.50 and what's supposed to come down off of the line here is going to be 16. No. The current price is already 16. And when that contract runs out, I believe Enstar's contract is the last of all of the contracts in South Central that's going to run out in 2023. That price is going to reset, and it's going to ratchet up real fast. So, that's what we need to keep in mind, that those are the alternatives. You can't look at the current price and say, compared to current price, this is what our alternatives are. No, you got to look at where that price is already going.
Yeah, and there's if you're looking at alternatives with regard to what's best for Alaskans heating their homes, and what's best would be the lowest cost possible, plus, or maybe first is availability or reliability, and then what is the lowest cost possible being the best case, right? There's no path forward for Cook Inlet gas to get less expensive. There's no path forward for imported LNG to get less expensive over time.
Correct.
The only path forward for Alaskans is a gas line with an export facility.
Correct. Yeah. Ultimately, what we have to remember here is that it's not just a difference of what's the price point. The question is, what's the price floor and what's the price ceiling? Because if you do imports, okay, maybe right now the imports are a little bit better than the initial price off of the gas line, but that import price has nowhere to go but up. Whether that is because of cost overruns in terms of the regasification plant or something like that, or because something goes crazy in the world market again, that gas cost has nowhere to go but up. Whereas if you build a gas line, yes, it is. And you saw Senator Stedman comment to this. The gas line is drastically overbuilt for in-state use. We know that. That's on purpose, because the whole point here is that even though it is overbuilt and the price is going to start here, the way you get the price down is by volume. If you can get the volumes to start dropping, or if you can get the volumes to go up, the price will start coming down. And whether that means that you're using more gas for people around Anchorage to heat their homes, or you're using or generate electricity, or you start bringing on industrial customers. We've been talking about that a little bit. Or you start exports. Exports is when you get that serious drop, and John mentions this a little bit later on. That's when gas goes from 17 to 5, and that's when things change.
All right, let's get back to John.
And lastly, the last slide I'll present from Hillcorp's presentation, just showing the price. One addition that I did was I added that star up there where it says Hillcorp charged Enstar in March 2026. Because of the cold temperatures that we had over this past winter, we were not able to get gas from any other location that we needed for our customers. Hillcorp provided that gas. They provided half a BCF, and the price was $16. You can see the latest Fury and Enstar contract pricing that was there. That was about $13.69. That's for a new contract. Because of the royalty relief that was passed by the Department of Natural Resources, we had a provision in our contract that stated if they have royalty relief, they will drop the price down to $12.30. So we're receiving gas at that rate today. But there's no doubt the price continues to increase as we move out in the future. Last thing I want to note about this slide, the green bar there where it says $8.36 for Hillcorp gas going out into the future. There is an escalator on that, so the price for Hillcorp gas will not remain at $8.36. It will increase depending on what CPI inflation is, capped at 1.5%.
Seems low.
That's a great contract that we executed back then. Yes, sir. So what does that Hillcorp contract specifically mean to Enstar? When you look at what it provides to our customers on an annual basis, this is a delivery profile. So these are firm commitments that Hillcorp has to deliver us gas. This is the last contract like this you will ever see in the Cook Inlet. We cannot contract for firm supplies of this nature. We've tried for a number of years. No one is willing to provide it. You can see in the summer months, obviously we're not consuming as much gas here as a community. So between 45 million a day, and in the wintertime, that ramps up to 162 million a day. Reminder, our total peak demand day is 320. So how do we get to that 320? We supplant that with storage that we've procured, whether it's Cook Inlet Natural Gas Storage, Alaska, and we also leverage the HEX contract to get some gas for that purpose as well. But this is one of the largest challenges that we have. This contract expires in 2033, and we have to find a replacement for 162 million a day, and there's no one in the Cook Inlet that can provide that today.
That's a pretty bold statement and should be sobering to people along the rail belt, well, at least South Central Alaska, who are relying upon gas for either for heating their home or electricity, is that to your legislator, we're going to run out of heat in a number of years and we'll run out of electricity. I've been to other places in the world where they have brownouts and it's just a normal thing, right? The electricity just doesn't run. It just doesn't work part of the day because there's not enough of it, right? We could be that country. We could find ourselves in that position where you just don't have enough gas to generate the electricity, and you're just going to do without electricity for a little while.
Those countries tend to be a little warmer than us too.
They tend to be. Although, yeah, that is a true statement. I did watch the locals. I was co-located with a police district in Afghanistan, and their police station wasn't heated with electricity. It was heated with wood and wood stoves. They brought them in for the wintertime, took them out for the summertime. But their electricity only ran for a couple hours a day in the middle of the winter, right? So it just, anyway, all I'm saying is it is possible to live in a place where you don't have electricity 24/7. It is a function of thinking long-term and investing in the right thing that's going to give you reliable energy going forward. And what John Sims has told us is that you don't have that from Cook Inlet. So you're going to have to do something. And that something is either import it or build a pipeline. One of the two at this point. Or you do something third that's like build a coal plant that can generate electricity. You'd have to swap over your natural gas boiler and furnace to an electric one, but that's an alternative.
To that point, Ben, let me just bring something up. But I hear a lot of people making comments about, well, we shouldn't do this. We should do hydro, or we should do coal, or we should do something else. I'm like, okay, my theory on energy sources is whatever works. I don't care if it's wind or solar or hydro or nuclear or what have you. You got to make the technology work. You got to make the economics work. Past that, I don't care. One of the major pieces that I think it's passed over is that since 2020, we have had every permit that we have needed to build this pipeline. That is one of the things that, we can complain about all the money that we spent on AGDC, but that is one of the things that they did is they got every permit that we needed to get this pipeline built. If you want to go in a different direction, whether it's coal or hydro or whatever, can you get the permitting? And is the permitting going to survive lawsuits? And can we survive while those lawsuits are going on? Because that's something that we forget about sometimes.
I totally agree. And the length of time that it's going to take to get a permit for a new coal plant that would supplant or that would help with the lack of gas problem in 2033 is probably not feasible. Like, you're going to get a coal plant in 3 years? Probably not.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
probably going to take close to a decade.
Right. The Obama administration put a whole bunch of new restrictions on new coal power plants in terms of the emissions and the like. And even though we've got a friendly administration right now, and for the next about 2.5 years, are you going to get through that permitting process and start building fast enough? Or are we going to be into the next presidency, which I don't know if it's going to be a Republican or a Democrat next. Is the next president going to make it worse? Like we saw under the Biden administration. So that's something we're not necessarily thinking all about.
Well, I think that there is a fiduciary duty of the legislature to look at the $1 billion that was spent or thereabouts to get the permitting done for this project. And the duty is to say, before we just toss that out and say that was a $1 billion mistake, we ought to be doing our due diligence to see what is possible to make it work. Even if it means that going forward, we don't have as much revenue from it, but we can at least benefit from that $1 billion that was spent, then I think the fiduciary duty is to say yes. Now, I get it if they're saying that the pipeline is going to cause a net loss of revenue, then maybe the fiduciary duty says, well, yes, we spent $1 billion. We don't want to make another $1 billion mistake by building a pipeline and then our revenue drops. I get that part, but that's not and this is why I started this with that question at the beginning of the show is I don't think that's a valid argument, because it assumes that you're not going to you're not going to drill any more wells, because there's no question that there's more oil out there on the North Slope. There's no question that the pipeline is going to continue to have oil flowing through it as long as we have wells that are producing oil. So the concept of losing revenue because you build this pipeline is not, it's not an apples to apples argument. Once you start talking about drilling more oil wells, then it's not a concern anymore, because more wells equals more oil, not less pipeline.
Yeah, well, and that goes into the the other consideration besides money, which is risk. It's, do you take the dollar that you have, or do you take the risk that you can get to? And back when oil was our state's bread and butter, in terms of the state's fiscal scenario, it sounded better to go ahead and take the risk, because you have to at some point. You don't have a whole lot of other alternatives. Now that we have the permanent fund as our fallback and as our primary revenue source, that calculus has changed somewhat. Now it's, oh, okay, well, we know this is coming in. We know that oil prices are going to go down some, oil production is going to go down some, because that's what oil fields do.
With no new drilling, it will.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We know that there's more out there, but is it worth it to go get it? The whole bird in the hand versus two in the bush situation. If I've got a bird in the hand versus two in the bush, or I've got a bird in each hand, that changes the calculus of your thinking.
A question, Representative Allard.
Thank you. Co-Chair, thanks for being here, Mr. Sims. I got a question. So You said 2033.
Yes.
Do you have a projection on the price of that gas would be? Like, what are we going to do when those contracts expire?
Yeah, through the chair, Representative Allard. So I'll get to that later in the presentation. We pay currently today, or we just filed this with the commission, $10.80 per MCF. That is a combination of that Hillcorp contract that is a vast majority of our gas that we procure from the Cook Inlet, and then all of the other discretionary gas sales that we purchase from Fury, and then also that $16 price that I was talking about from Hillcorp.
I'll wait till the site comes. Thank you.
I wanted to touch on, again, Hex, the second largest producer in Cook Inlet. This was a presentation that they gave to ADA on May 13th. The reason why I show this is there's a lot of discussion about other producers being able to replace the Hillcorp volumes. And so I mentioned that Enstar needs 320 million a day in the wintertime and that peak demand. The second largest producer in the Cook Inlet doubled its production from 10 to 25 million. So we need 10 to 15 times more what they can do on a daily basis to meet our customers' needs. Not a realistic scenario. And that's one of the reasons why losing that Hillcorp contract in 2033 is a major challenge for Enstar and for our customers.
Representative Allard?
You're just leaving me with a lot of questions. So, well, I guess that goes on your next slide. I'll just wait. That's Hex. Here we are. Never mind.
Mr. Sims?
Okay. So one of the things that we've heard a lot about this legislative session is royalty relief. Is that something that will save the Cook Inlet? Enstar is has supported royalty relief in the past, as long as we still allow the Department of Natural Resources to manage the resources there. But this was directly from the commissioner's final findings of the determination for kitchen lights unit royalty modification. And one of the things that it stated was, if we provide this royalty relief, and if you look at the center columns where it says cumulative production from September 2025, MMSCF, that is the cumulative production coming from those fields from 2024, and this in the normal price high case scenario. So the most optimistic case of getting gas out of that unit, by December 2036, they will produce 68,369, or the equivalent of 68 BCF total from that facility. So if you divide that by the 12 years that it takes to get that cumulative production, you're looking at right around 6 BCF a year. Again, Enstar needs up to 38, and that's just Enstar. That does not include the electric utilities. So again, second largest producer in Cook Inlet, they're not going to be able to supply gas to all of the electric utilities. Last slide here before I get to Representative Allard's questions. So how do we, again, meet the demand for our customers? This slide kind of summarizes it here. This shows the kind of ebbs and flows of demand on an annual basis for our customers. The dark black line represents customer demand, and all of the colors that are underneath that represent the contracts that go to make up for that customer demand. So anywhere you see green, whether it's dark, light, or kind of regular green, that represents a Hillcorp contract. The other colors of the red there, that is Fury, and then the blue represents all of the gas that we are pulling out of storage. So it's been produced, it's been injected into our storage facility, and then during that time of peak demand, we pull it out. So it's all of the green that we are losing, again, starting in 2033, that we have to find a replacement for. So the long-term plan.
Representative Allard?
This summer.
Hey, Rob, I just realized that global warming should help with our problem. If we could just get the climate to warm up till 2033, it would help Enstar significantly, wouldn't it? No more cold winters.
Oh boy. Yeah, you got a point there, Ben. It might not keep the lights on because I don't think global warming is changing how much sun, how long the sun is in the sky. But
that's only half the year problem.
There you go. That's right.
I'm actually going to ask a question. So what's the wholesale price of Hex? What, even with the energy relief in 2033?
Representative Allard, through the chair, we are purchasing gas right now. We buy about 15 million a day from Fury. Some of that gas is on the $12.30 per MCF price. The rest of it is at $13.50 per MCF. And we have that price, the $13.50 until the first part of 2027, where we'll more than likely see an increase.
We need them.
Absolutely. We need every last molecule we can get out of Cook Inlet until we have a long-term solution in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Representative Galvin.
Thank you, Co-Chair Foster, through the chair. This slide here made me mindful of the storage conversation. I had heard comments kind of in the background that storage had not been working out as smoothly as the different companies were hoping in Cook Inlet. Can you give me any more on that? If there's context that I should have around understanding if that's an efficient facility and way for us to be managing to make sure our load is there for us?
Representative Galvin, through the chair, storage is critical. And there are two entities right now that provide third-party storage. You have Cook Inlet Natural Gas Storage Alaska, which is owned and operated by Enstar, and you have Hillcorp Storage, both of which are operating. There are different price mechanisms for those. Singza has had some challenges because of the heavy draw that we had to pull out of storage. It put a lot of pressure and a lot of strain on the wells. We've since corrected that. But it's an ongoing battle to make sure that those wells are operating, but they've been doing the job that they've kind of been asked to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please proceed.
Well, that could also be that Enstar's operating wells, and normally supply companies don't operate wells. Maybe that's part of the problem, but not the issue today.
Thank you. So the long-term plan for Enstar, additional storage is critical, whether it's additional Cook Inlet supplies, LNG imports, or the pipeline coming down from the North Slope. We have to have additional storage. We filed in January with the RCA to build an additional storage facility in the Kenai. We're still waiting to hear back from them. We're expecting an order sometime in the next couple months. That will allow us to move forward with a storage project that will allow us to execute some contracts for the purposes of LNG import and for the AK LNG project. The Glenfarne agreements, we've been in negotiations with them for probably the last 10 months. What we have today are three sort of connected agreements. It is a gas supply agreement that's governed by a framework agreement. So within that framework agreement, there's key definitions, and also it articulates the plan of switching from LNG import over to the AK LNG pipeline phase one. Underneath that framework agreement are the details behind the LNG import project and the phase one pipeline. So that is our plan. We've, like I said, been negotiating for some time. We are very close. There are a couple just, I would say, relatively minor pieces that we need to agree upon, but this is a 30-year agreement. So we need to make sure that every word is correct and appropriate for our customers so that we can move forward with that and file that with the RCA.
See, this is what really concerns me. 30 years, we get locked into a contract and we don't even have the pipeline yet. We don't even know what the cost, the price, we don't know any of that. And Enstar thinks it's going to submit a purchase agreement for either, if I understand correctly, either from gas coming down the pipeline or gas being imported through a facility that's co-owned or built by Enstar, not Enstar, I'm sorry, Glenfarne. So what's the market going to sustain for a price point at this point in time? Is that good for Alaska or is that not good for Alaska? My guess is, my assumption would be it's going to be much larger than we would want it to be now, because the only thing that gets us a smaller price is an export facility with a pipeline attached to it. So whatever the project, whatever this agreement looks like, I think it's probably going to be a sticker shock issue for Alaskans.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a sticker shock issue. The question is, is it sticker shock temporarily, or is it sticker shock for forever and recurring sticker shock, every other year as it continues to ratchet up? He does go into it a little bit further on about some of the pieces that are going to be in that contract, where as the volume comes down, they're going to have the ability to start bringing some of that cost down. He said that starts at 500. Oh crud! What was it? 500 MCF a day. When throughput on the pipeline hits 500 MCF a day, which effectively means that either you are starting imports or you have some very large industrial customers in South Central that are using gas, or potentially somewhere else along the pipeline. So again, so much of this depends on, do we get the export portion back up and running? And do we get the export portion up and running? That's what a lot of this depends on.
I guess what I'm concerned about when I hear Enstar talking about a long-term contract of 30 years, it seems to be presumptuous at this point, because we don't know where the gas is coming from 30 years from now. We don't know. We don't know whether that means it's going to be importing it. We do know that it's not likely coming from Cook Inlet. So it's either importing or a pipeline. So
right.
Which is it that we're signing a 30-year contract at a certain price?
Right, but that is standard procedure in the natural gas market, whether you're talking about LNG or you're talking about onshore in a pipeline, is because of the massive capital costs required to build these types of projects, whether it's pipelines or LNG plants or what have you, and the fact that gas is not nearly as lucrative as oil. The way that you get it financed is you have to get 20 to 30-year contracts to be able to take to the bank to see, hey, I have customers. They are going to buy from me if we build this thing. And that's where
I totally get that. What I'm suggesting is you've got to put a contract in place now that is, and maybe he's going to get into this, so I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but you put a contract in place now for 30 years so that everybody can bank on it. I totally understand that. But is that contract for gas that's coming down a pipeline, or is that gas or LNG coming from somewhere else, from Canada?
He does get into that a little bit, because you'll see that Jamie asks him, okay, why don't we just, instead of building this import facility, I think that starts the next slide, that then gets turned around and turned into the export facility after a couple of years. Why don't we just let Marathon refurbish their plant, and let Hillcorp, who bought the old Marathon plant, refurbish it and turn it into an import facility? And he's like, well, if we do that, we're going to have to sign that import contract for 30 years. If we do this with Glenfarne, and Glenfarne is building both the import and export facility, then
so they're agnostic from where the source of the gas actually is, whether it's from the importation or whether it's from the pipeline.
Right. And that way, let's say you import for, you put in a small import plant and you import for 2 years, maybe, until the pipeline is up and running and ready to go. Then, and then you turn that around and now it's an export plant because so much of the hardware is the same. Then you're still buying your gas from Glenfarne. So Glenfarne's happy because they're getting paid. You're happy. Enstar's happy because they're getting gas, and it doesn't matter which direction the gas is flowing as long as everybody gets their product.
Yeah. Okay.
Enstar is not providing any equity on either the LNG import or the phase 1 pipeline. Originally, we had considered and contemplated providing some equity into that project. But then in 2024, HB 307, there was a floor amendment, Amendment 14, that strictly prohibited utilities from recovering LNG import facilities and rates. That passed the floor, I think, with just one objection. And that obviously made us rethink that decision, which cost us about a year as far as our development goes. And so we are no longer going to be providing any equity to that project. Once we have executed the contract with Glenfarne, we will be filing it as a gas supply agreement with the RCA. and the RCA will have jurisdiction over that contract where they can either approve it, or they can deny it, or they can make recommended tweaks to that contract. So a utility is not allowed to charge customers any charges on their bill without RCA approval. So we will not be doing so without that approval. This is a condition prior to development for Glenfarne and for Enstar to move forward with that project.
And that might make sense to people considering Enstar is a private company. But with regard to your utilities, which are co-ops and you elect the board, I wonder if that's actually a necessary thing. Like your board, your cooperative should not be doing something that you didn't authorize through your representation. So there is a check and balance already. Anyway, digress. Let's see what he has to say.
Representative Galvin.
Thank you, Co-Chair Foster. I think your last sentence probably answers this, and I just want to make sure I heard it properly, that RCA must approve any lease. Can you repeat that last sentence again? I want to make sure I've heard it.
Yeah, Representative Galvin through the chair. So a utility is not allowed to charge customers any rate or charge without having approval by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. So they have jurisdiction over utilities.
Mm-hmm.
So once we have a contract that has been executed, it will be filed with the commission for that purpose. And it is a condition precedent on the agreement where the RCA has to approve this contract prior to that development happening.
A follow-up?
Follow-up.
Okay, so this gets at really, to me, the heart of what I think a lot of legislators are trying to navigate. And I see you shaking your head, yes. So you must be familiar with this conversation. Probably a million people have asked you directly, but I'm going to ask it to you in another way that perhaps then you can answer it, same question in another way. And so one of my biggest concerns is that risk that the Alaska ratepayers will be left holding the bag for the entire cost of phase one if phase two does not come to pass. And so particularly if phase one ends up with cost overruns, for example, or low throughput rates, maybe lower than what we have been quoted, that would change up the whole mix. And so again, the question, which I think you've already answered, but I'm going to ask again, what assurance can you give us that any purchase contract that Enstar enters into with 8-Star will leave those risks with the pipeline owners and not have them as a pass-through to Enstar? And of course, that means to ratepayers.
Representative Galvin, through the chair, that's a great question. It seems to be kind of the question of the session. Enstar's agreement has a fixed price. Enstar does not care if the project goes over cost. It does not impact in any way, shape, or form the price that we will be charging customers. It is a fixed price. It has a annual inflator, just like all of our contracts do, but it is not dictated or determined by cost overruns whatsoever.
Follow-up?
Follow-up.
Thank you. And then the next question is, a lot of us are very excited to say, yes, I 1,000% support this because I want to keep low prices to our own constituents paying, having a hard time paying their bills. So when you say the words fixed price, can you elaborate or give us more context to give us any certainty around our being able to afford that fixed price?
Representative Galvin, through the chair, if you wait just a couple slides, we'll get to what the price is and start diving into that.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you. So starting off, just wanted to give some kind of high-level concepts on LNG deliveries as it's articulated in the contract today. So the concept has been since inception with Glenfarne that Glenfarne will build a small section of LNG import facilities at the export site. And the concept there is that once the AK LNG export project is up and running completely and is exporting gas, it can buy up the portion that we have developed for the import facility. And the reason why that's important is these projects, the import project and the pipeline project, are two separate and distinct projects. So in order for the customers to get to a solution or a place where we're not paying for both projects, one has to acquire the other. And so that's the purpose of the framework agreement, so that the AKLNG export project can procure or buy the facilities of the import project so that the customers are no longer on the hook for those costs. That's one of the sort of commercial eloquences that we have struck here with Glenfarne, is that ability. Looking at these projects, especially 2 years ago, when we were considering, any major infrastructure project requires long-term contracts. And so I was terrified of executing a contract with an entity to import LNG on a 30-year basis, and then having a pipeline come down and missing out on the opportunity for that low-cost gas. So this really does exactly what we were hoping. If the pipeline gets built and the exports are happening, that import project goes away. We're able to take advantage of those low-cost, options that will be provided from North Slope gas, and our customers are the better off for it. So this just shows kind of an example of when the cargoes would be coming in. Again, talking about the storage requirements, everything you see there in orange is additional storage that we need, and sort of the uncontracted storage that we have for this facility. Now, diving into Representative Galvin's question and Representative Allard's question on price. So the LNG import price, it is based off of JKM. JKM is Japan Korea Marker. It is the hub for LNG import pricing or export pricing. If you were to look at that today, right now, it's about $18.30. When we looked at this project a couple years ago, it was $8. The point there is volatility in the LNG market. It fluctuates. It goes up and down. The lowest I've seen it in a long time was a couple years ago at that $8 price. What a lot of people forget is there is infrastructure that's required to bring in LNG imports. We can't just buy a tanker and then offload it somehow into our system. The cost for that LNG terminal infrastructure is between $3 to $5 per MCF, depending on participating volumes during that time. So right off the get-go, you have nearly $20 gas, potentially even more, for that LNG solution. So that's challenging, especially when compared to the $10.80. And you hear discussion up in Fairbanks going on. Fairbanks just filed for a 60% increase on their cost of power adjustment, again, because they haven't had the opportunity to take advantage of cook inlet gas. They've had to use the high cost of diesel. That 60% possibility for South Central Alaska is real and is very possible, and will happen with either of these scenarios, whether it's staying in Cook Inlet or importing LNG.
Okay, so I think what I understood him to say regarding prices, maybe I cut him off too soon, is that the 30-year contract that he is looking at with Glenfarne is a either-or situation. Either I purchase it from you and you are importing it, or I purchase it from you and you are exporting it, or you're not exporting it. There's a pipeline and I'm buying it from you because it's a pipeline. Whichever price it is, or whichever source it is, hopefully the lowest price is what we ended up paying, not whatever the price is for the gas that is coming. The point, I guess, that you might be asking, that I'm kind of stumbling on, is if you're going to build a pipeline, is there a need for an import price? You have a pipeline. So whatever the price is of the pipeline, that's what you're going to be paying.
Yeah, I've only been doing this 6 years. I finally found the mute button again. So that's a timing issue. Do we get the pipe? Do we have some mild winters here over the next few years, and construction on the pipe goes great, and we get the pipe done before we need imports? Cool. That's a possibility. Do we goof around here? Do we have some supply chain issues getting some sort of materials or maybe workforce issues getting the pipeline up and going? And do we have a couple of really bad winters in South Central again, where we burn off more than we think and we don't get the pipeline done as quick as we hope we would? Then we may need imports. That's a little bit up in the air at this point. Glenfarne has been saying since last year, we think that we can get this pipe done about the time that you get that you guys are going to need extra gas. But that's cutting it pretty darn close. And so, John being in the position that he's in, he can't cut it that close. He has to find another source of supply.
And I get that. I guess what I honestly, I don't care at this point. You're not going to get it from Cook Inlet long term. You're going to import it, or you're going to get it from the North Slope. Those are your options, or you're going to do some other source of energy. What I don't understand, and maybe this is where you just have to read the contract to understand, but the demand for in-state gas without an export facility is represented in what he just talked about with part of the 30-year contract. His demand is largely the demand, Enstar's demand, right? He says 300 BCF, maybe a little over 300 BCF is what the demand is. Okay. At 300 BCF,
MCF per day. That because
300 MCF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Billion versus million.
No, you're right. 300 MCF. What we heard from Gaffney Klein was that same demand is a $25 to $30 per MCF price.
Right. And I heard that too. And I asked Department of Revenue to look into that. I said, on this section of it, your guys' numbers are not adding up. So I asked them that late last week, and they are currently talking, and they're supposed to get back to me on that soon.
Yeah. So that's the concern that I have with a 30-year contract. If Enstar is agnostic where the gas is coming from, and it can come from the pipeline without an export facility, or it can come from an import facility without a gas pipeline, it can do either of those, then that's worst case scenario for Alaskans. Imported is likely, at least initially, less costly than a pipeline without an export facility, because we don't currently have the demand in this state to justify a cost that would be competitive with the import facility. But Glenfarne needs Enstar's 30-year contract, and maybe some other buyers, to help justify an in-state pipeline without an export facility, phase one, right? They need to have some sort of contractual buyer for their gas in order for phase one to be marketable, or not marketable, financeable.
Right. Yeah, because this is the whole nut that we have been trying to crack for 30 years on this thing is you can get financing for a gas treatment plant and a LNG export facility, because we're building them down on the Gulf Coast. There's between Texas and Louisiana, there's 13 of them. You got one more in Georgia, and you got another one up in Maryland that have all been built in the last 10 years or so. We know how to finance those. We know that portion of it works. But when you add in the extra $11 billion or whatever it is for the pipeline itself, is that part financeable? And so the whole point of the phasing is to show, okay, we can build this pipeline on its own merits, which the only way that works is if it works for in-state gas. 10 years ago, that didn't work because the price out of Cook Inlet was low enough that there was no way that a pipeline from the slope could compete. But because the price is coming up and the availability is going down, now phase one is close. It kind of makes sense. And if we get phase two online, that's when everything comes into line. But the point of de-risking it by separating out the two phases is, can we make this portion of the financing work? Because we already know we can make the second portion of the financing work.
Yeah. And Glenfarne said for a number of months, I remember tail end of last year, that I was standing in the meeting in Nikiski where Adam Prestige says phase one stands alone, and we'll be able to make it financially feasible by itself. And that was the first time in years that I'd heard anybody say anything about in-state gas through the pipeline being something that would stand on its own. So that means the price has to be significantly high. Did he in his meeting here identify the in-state pipeline only price? He was just talking about prices. Maybe he was going to.
Yeah, he gets to it later on in his presentation. He says it's $16.
Okay, so now, so then if Alaskans are providing oversight on what is being communicated from our government right now, Enstar's price that they say they're going to sign a contract for, and Gaffney Klein's projection or opinion to the legislature on what the price would be at given demand are wild, like Gaffney Klein's twice wrong, right? Twice as much as what John is saying they're signing a contract for. Which is crazy, because 16 MCF, $16 per MCF on Gaffney Klein's chart was in the, I want to say it was in the 500 MCF throughput range. So how is Enstar going to be purchasing additional quantity in order to get that pricing? And that additional quantity is going where? Is it going into the ground, or they're banking on the fact that they're going to be able to find a buyer for it?
Ideally, it's not just Enstar. Ideally, it's going. So you heard him say near the beginning that Enstar is the supplier for Homer Electric. You've got two other electric utilities down there, and in terms of it with Chugach and MEA. So if they switch over, now you're talking about almost all of South Central's demand between those three entities. And South Central's demand is 65 to 70 BCF a year, depending on how cold the winter is. Then you got the possibility of what happens with GVA up in Fairbanks, because I've been seeing a lot of comments in the chat room about how this really doesn't help Fairbanks, especially if you're not on the IGU distribution network up in the Fairbanks area. Let me tell you how this does help Fairbanks. If you have electricity in your house, this helps Fairbanks. One of the major reasons that the electric price in Fairbanks has skyrocketed in the last few years is because of the lack of gas in Cook Inlet. When the intertie was built, connecting the South Central electric utilities up to GVA, one of the things that we started doing is buying either we would contract with the utilities and buy the electricity straight up, or we'd go straight to the source, to Hillcorp or to BP or Chevron, whoever was getting the gas out of the inlet. We'd buy it directly, and then we would contract with Chugach or somebody to burn the gas in their power plants. 10 years ago, 30% of Fairbanks's electricity was coming from natural gas-fired power plants from Chugach and MEA. One of the major reasons our gas price or our electricity price has gone up is because GVA's contract ran out in 2022. And Hillcorp will not sell them anymore because Hillcorp doesn't have any to sell. So if you get that gas down into the South Central, one of the first things that can happen that's going to help Fairbanks is we can start burning natural gas, and we can shut off the diesel generators in North Pole. We can shut off some of those more expensive generation sources that we've been using because we don't have any other options. So we get that gas going, GVA benefits, and as long as you're hooked up to the electric grid up in Fairbanks, you are going to see some benefits from this thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I have fielded questions about people that don't understand the connection between the gas conversation, the gas pipeline, and their electric bill. I'm like, this is really fundamental to your existence here, right? Like most of your electricity, if you're along the rail belt, is generated by gas. So except for Fairbanks.
Yeah. So if you get to, I don't think we're getting to it tonight, but after John Sims testified, yet MEA testified. And one of the things they said is 84% of MEA's electricity is generated by natural gas.
Yeah.
You want to change the price of electricity, get the cheaper gas. That's the best thing that we can do, at least in the relatively short term.
Yeah. And all of these questions, and this is probably one of the more important days, briefings in the legislature in this committee, is to hear from the utilities, because this is the pain point that I think the voters are going to be taking with them all the way to November. The cost of electricity is not going anywhere but up unless we have some kind of long-term plan to bring it down. And that plan for us at this point in time is only a pipeline. Now, there could be other options, but they're not a plan right now. Like we talked about earlier, it could be coal. It could be a hydro dam. There are other options out there to generate electricity and bring the cost down. That's not a plan. Those aren't plan worthy right now. The only plan we have is this pipeline, permitted, ready to go. We just need the right tax regime and the investing dollars.
Yep.
Supposedly. All right, let's get through the pricing conversation
That
here.
means for the local community, if you look at the rates that were charged to the Anchorage School District in 2025, add a 30% increase onto that, it equates to about 1.5 million additional dollars per year that the school has to pay for. Make that 60%, we're now looking at $3 million for the Anchorage School District. So this has a real and immediate impact on all of our economies in South Central Alaska.
Representative Galvin.
Thank you. This is more information than I think we've had since looking at this bill. So I appreciate it very much. And I have a few questions, and I'll have more down the road. Are these additive?
Representative Galvin,
In other words, if it's still, sorry, let me spell it out for the rest of the folks who are listening. So in other words, if it's $18 Japan market, and then $1 shipping plus $3 to $5 for LNG facilities, then are we talking $22 to $24?
So Representative Galvin, through the chair, the total all-in cost is between that 16 to 22. If you use a JKM price that's 8 to 10, then you're going to be in the $16 ballpark. If you're looking at prices today, it's going to be closer to the 23, 22 or above that. So yes, those are additive. The LNG terminal infrastructure, the $3 to $5 per MCF, that will be on top of the JKM price. You also have to factor in the fact that Enstar for our distribution charges is an additional $3. This is just what the weighted average cost of gas would be. Then you have the utility charges on top of that.
Okay, so we're missing a few things on this slide.
Yes.
So the Enstar pieces and the other $3 that would be, so there's Enstar and then utility. Is that what I heard?
Representative Galvin, through the chair. So by utilities, simply Enstar.
Okay.
So yeah, the Enstar charges, distribution charge would have to go on top of the weighted average cost of gas, just like it does today. The point is the $10.80 per MCF is going up to something significantly higher, depending upon what the JKM prices are going to be. That's sort of your volatility piece. The known are going to be the terminal infrastructure components of that, which is about $3 to $5 per MCF, depending on the volume that's participating in that project.
Okay, and I follow up if I may.
This is a really complex and complicated subject here. I know that he's got another hour that he's before this committee talking. So there must be some fantastic questions.
Senator Galvin.
Thank you. So I think that Fairbanks, and I wish that Representative, he's online, so he may have a way of approaching this that I don't, but I know they have signed a 20 or 30-year contract already. I don't know how that compares to what we're hearing right now, and I would love to know that.
Representative Galvin, through the chair, they're paying about $23 per MCF for trucked LNG off of the North Slope with Harvest.
So it's comparable.
Unfortunately, yes.
Well, that's not going to be great news for the whole state of Alaska at this point. But I appreciate what you're saying, that the JKM prices may change significantly, in which case it would change for our market.
Representative Galvin, through the chair. So we are in the middle of a couple conflicts going on, which have driven up the price.
Okay. Yep.
When you go back and look at historical JKM prices, during times over the last 10 years, it has been higher than the $18, and during times it has been lower. The point is we will be subject to those fluctuations and to that volatility.
Paula?
Representative Galvin?
Thank you. So this deal is done. Is that correct? In terms of your signing and your agreements?
So as I mentioned, Representative Gavin through the chair, there are a couple things that we're still tweaking, but the bulk of it, yes, is done.
Follow up.
Representative Galvin?
So I know that there was some discussion around high volume users having a break or a different price. I think Nutrien, the new Agrium, and perhaps other high volume users were going to have perhaps a break in price. Is that something that isn't possible because of the way that international, I guess because of the international nature of this deal? Is that the problem? Is that why we can't get a great in-state deal?
Representative Galvin through the chair, I wouldn't, so important point, this is just the LNG import.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Right.
I would not expect
Right.
a Nutrien to
Sorry.
be participating at these prices, at these levels. It wouldn't
Right.
make business sense.
It
for
wouldn't
them.
help. This
Yeah.
is just for that import time period. Thank
This
you.
is
Very
just-
good context.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Allard?
Thank you. Through the co-chair, Mr. Sims, I wrote a note down here, and I know we have Hillcore in the room, but why wouldn't we refurbish the old Marathon plant instead of building? Anyway, can you help me?
Representative Allard through the chair. So that is an option.
Okay.
Going back to my statement on not wanting to enter into a 30-year agreement and being able to take advantage of North Slope gas when it came, that's one of the first challenges. The second challenge is that facility as it sits today cannot meet the needs of Enstar customers. It's when you look at the permitting it's going through right now, I believe it's about 20 BCF that it's considering importing. Again, we need 38.
Okay.
So there's a problem right there, just on its face. And the total Cook Inlet demand is about 70. So from my perspective, if I'm looking at doing projects that are probably similar cost for the expansion of the harvest facility plus a greenfield LNG import facility on the AK LNG site, and I have the commercial eloquence of being able to transfer over to the AK LNG project when it comes down, that optionality for my customers makes a lot more sense than signing into a long-term agreement for imported LNG where there's zero revenue coming to the state and I'm subject to JKM volatility for a 30-year period.
Okay. May I?
Representative Allard?
I think it's important the public know that. They have to have that. So I'm going to ask you another question.
Please.
I want you to tell me and the public the worst case scenario if we don't get this built. How is this going to be detrimental or positive? If it doesn't get built, what does that mean for the municipality of Anchorage? And if it does get built, what does that mean for the municipality of Anchorage? Or what Enstar actually covers, right? Because I want a reality check to everybody.
Representative Allard through the chair. So the AK LNG full project is the only project after $5 million of analysis, demand studies, worldwide RFPs to try and find solutions. It is the only project that has the potential to reduce the price of energy to the state of Alaska. Everything else has increased pricing. And we already talked about the impacts earlier in my presentation. A 60% increase, similar to what they're going through up in Fairbanks today, equates to a $3 million additional annual expense for the school district. Think of what that means for local governments, for homes, for businesses. It is an economy killer. That is one of the reasons why I'm here today speaking publicly about this. The reason why it hasn't been done earlier, I have been under confidentiality. So I haven't been able to disclose a lot of the things I'd like to be able to disclose, but it's time. It's time to move forward with a project, again, that is the only one from my perspective and from our company's perspective after millions of dollars worth of study and RFPs, is the only project that has the potential to reduce the price of energy in the state of Alaska.
Thank you.
Rob, I think back to the line of questioning in Senate Resources, and I think back to the line of questioning that I've witnessed thus far in Senate Finance. Similarly, in the House side as well. That statement stands on its own, and all other conversations about things that are shiny objects or things we'd like to talk about or things we'd like to consider or what ifs and all of that kind of all just takes a back seat, right?
Yep.
There is no other project. There are ideas, but there is no other project that has the ability to reduce the cost of energy along the rail belt.
Correct.
And it's not just gas energy, it's electricity. Both. Reduce both.
Correct.
No other project. So we could make arguments to say, hey, what you need to do is just go buy some coal plants, build some coal plants, or build a hydro dam, or let's do nuclear, or what? There's all these other good ideas out there, right? But today, and thinking that in the next within the next 3 to 5 years, we could be freezing to death, literally, because we run out of gas. The only project that we have that will prevent that end state from happening is building a pipeline. That's it. That's the only option we have right now. So tell me again what the value to the legislature this pipeline is.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem is we are in a situation, and this is why I have loved this debate, as tedious as it gets sometimes, is about the gas line, is it illustrates how much of a disconnect that we have between the what works for the people and what the people of the state need and what the economy of the state needs versus what works for us here in a legislature and what we think we need, which is state revenue. And this is the huge disconnect. And if we don't deal with that disconnect, let's say we do get this, let's say we do pass a bill and we get the pipeline built and we're sitting pretty in 5 years. Okay, great. What happens when the next crisis comes around? And again, we're still using the permanent fund for 2/3-ish of our revenue. And so the incentives around here don't change. Is the next one going to create the same problem? Or alternatively, is everything on the slope going to go so well that the state rakes in a ton of money and creates a whole lot more spending that, helps people get reelected? Because that's what we use a lot of our budget for is to, find votes back home to say, hey, look what I got for you in the budget. Send me back to Juneau. But doesn't actually do anything that actually helps the economy in the long run, that actually helps people like you and me, and I'm assuming the rest of the folks listening to this show actually make a living and make things cheaper and easier to get a job, things like that. Easier to start a business.
There's, I think that people have been paying attention. No, the narrative has been for a very long time that Cook Inlet is running out of gas, whether it's there or whether it's just too expensive to go get or too expensive to continue to go get. It's a path that doesn't lead to lower cost gas in the future. Philanthropist Frank points out that his opinion is that imports will reduce cost. Well, we just heard that from John that that's not the case. That the only can you help us understand why the cost of imports? Let me back up. Help us understand why importing LNG as an alternative to a gas pipeline leads to higher prices.
So ultimately, what it leads to higher prices in two ways. Number one, because you're exposing yourself to the volatility of the world market. One of the things that we've heard from our consultants over the last few weeks here is that most LNG contracts around the world are pegged to a price of oil. So you say, okay, you sign a contract that says, okay, the price of LNG is pegged at 13% of Brent crude, or it's pegged at 12.5% of WTI, West Texas Intermediate crude, or something along those lines. So when you have an event around the world, Russia invades Ukraine, the US starts bombing Iran, something along those lines that changes the crude price, even though you have a long-term contract, your price will fluctuate considerably. There is nowhere to go but up in the long run. The other reason is because the way that you bring the energy prices down in the long run is volume. When you are bringing in ships, a ship is a ship is a ship, and bringing in the second ship does not make it any cheaper than the first ship. But when you have a pipeline that is only partially full, the way that you bring those costs down is your incremental per unit cost is you fill that pipeline more and more and you bring it up to full capacity. And yeah, it's insanely expensive when you're going to build a pipe that, you know, that you only need 8% of the capacity, as we heard from Senator Stedman. But if you can continue to raise that capacity, you've got a long way to go till you hit the ceiling on the capacity, which means you got a long way to go until you hit the floor on the price. So that's the direction that's the direction we need to be going. Is not just what's the cheapest price in 2033. It's what gives us a path afterwards. What gives us a path to going up versus what gives us a path to going down.
Yeah. Well, I know that the guy who's leading Enstar is a believer that the only way you get lower prices is to have large volumes of gas flowing to more customers than Alaska can provide. And those would be outside the state. And that makes complete sense to me. You've got, it's a volume problem. Price of gas is a volume problem that we do not have enough purchasers to reduce the cost, whether you're importing LNG or whether you're buying gas coming down a pipeline from the North Slope. Alaska just doesn't have the economy yet, the number of people heating homes, number of industrial facilities buying gas to reduce the cost of the I was going to say the electrons, but it's not the electrons, the
gas molecules.
The molecules. The word molecules is what I was looking for. Reduce the molecule, whether they're molecules in a boat or whether they're molecules in a pipeline. We just do not have the capacity to have the throughput necessary. So I don't think they're going to get into it in this, but I wanted to ask this question because it was something that I was not able to do some research on, and it confused me a little bit. And then maybe this is Gaffney Klein's problem. But the presentation that Gaffney Klein said that after you've got the export facility, the volume enables you to get down to the $5 limit or $5 cost of gas. And what didn't make sense to me was why. So we know that the cost that's going to be competitive for exporting is somewhere in the maybe $8 to $10 or $9 to $11 range. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if Glenfarne is selling $10 gas to Asia, why would Glenfarne sell $10 gas, or why would they sell $5 gas to Alaskans? What is the mechanism that causes that to happen if it's not a price cap?
So it's two things. It's the cost of the shipping, and it's the cost of turning it in, the cost of liquefaction. What we have heard from Department of Revenue is it's about $2.50. I can find that here in a second. It's about $2.50 for the shipping from here over to Japan, and it's roughly the same. I think a little bit less. I think it's about $2 to liquefy it to get it on the ship.
That makes sense. So you're looking at the $5 cost in transportation and liquefaction that the export facility or export customer is purchasing or paying for, where the in-state, we save that cost because it's not necessary for us. Now I understand. That makes sense. I had forgotten about that. Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's continue here.
May I?
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Co-Chair. So I want to make you break it down even more, because I think what people really need to know is how it's going to affect the individual resident. I don't know, a single mom with 2 jobs, a young family of 4, an older senior citizen that is trying to make ends meet. When you Didn't the Enstar prices go up 20% already this year? Is that what we're looking at doing? And this isn't a cut on you. I want folks to understand what's going on. So did it go up 20% already?
Representative Allard to the chair. You could use that as an estimate. I think what's, you know,
I want it to hit home. I
no,
want folks to understand you're going to struggle, and it's going to hurt if you see a utility bill that's $500 a month.
well, we're already struggling. So this past winter, one of the coldest winters we've had in 5 decades, which resulted in increased consumption. When you look at our arrears or the folks that haven't been able to pay their bills compared to prior years, we have a $7 million balance compared to what used to be a $1 million balance. So they're already struggling, and that's without the price of
that's
gas.
incredible.
And so
I'm going to interject. So you're telling me that you used to kind of waive people's fees and kind of say, okay, we'll work with you. You're going to be on a payment plan from $1 million. And you're telling me now it's at $7 million. I've had phone calls from constituents saying, I can't pay my utility bill. I'm trying to work with Enstar, but I owe a lot. Is that what you just said on the record?
Representative Allard, that is what I said on the record, with the one exception. We work with all of our customers regardless of what the balance is.
With them,
Yeah.
But
So
they're struggling.
no, absolutely. And you know, our fantastic folks in customer service and credit, they work with them on a daily basis.
This is why I say this is the election issue for legislative and gubernatorial election coming up this year is energy, because there's no reduction in price. There's no relief in sight for people, and it's compounding. I made it for 1 month. I made it for 2 months, but to have to continue to do this month after month after month, by November, people are going to be livid. Interior, you're already feeling it greater than you are down in South Central Alaska. But nobody's getting a pay raise that much unless you work for state government somewhere.
Fairbanks has been seeing what's going on in South Central over the last couple of years and going, welcome to the party, pal. You know, we've been living this for 20, 30 years.
Yeah. I can't even understand why there aren't more legislators just saying, okay, look, this is not an issue of revenue for the state. This is an issue of taking care of people. Plain and simple. That's all this is. Revenue to the state is secondary. If we get some, great. If we don't, as long as people have got low cost energy or reduce this cost of energy for our people, then that's, I mean, there is an argument out there that is we're being myopically focused about some Alaskans that are only along the rail belt. And there's a bunch of other Alaskans out there that have high cost energy that are never going to benefit from a pipeline.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So
I think the conversation needs to go towards PCE and what happens. Is that the direction you were going to go?
That is one part of it. Absolutely. PCE is a major part of it, because you remember that if you live in a PCE community, which is most of northern and western Alaska, that your how much the state subsidizes your power as a residential customer is based on the average cost of power from Juneau, Anchorage, Mat-Su, and Fairbanks. And maybe I shouldn't have thrown it away. I had the letter from the RCA on. They came out with what the PCE cost was going to be, what the subsidized price would be, and sent it out to all the legislators. The subsidized price is let's see, what was it? It was about 21 cents a kilowatt hour. The unsubsidized price in Mat-Su is now 22. The unsubsidized price in Fairbanks was 23. And now with what we just saw a couple of days ago, that's going to go up to about 37, 38 per kilowatt hour. So that is a major part of it. You bring down those other two, and Anchorage, if I remember right, was at 19 or 20. So it was almost there.
And there's
so
an
you bring down those
relationship.
Costs. Correct. Yeah. So you bring down those costs along the rail belt, that affects the formula for PCE. So that's one part of it. Another part of it that we need to think about is if the cost of doing business in Anchorage gets cheaper and you live in a village where all of your goods go through Anchorage. You know, some of the costs, some of the goods coming to you might actually go down a little bit. You know, you're still dealing with, you know, airline fuel and whatever else. So, you know, maybe not that much right now, but it's every little bit helps. You know, I think, you know, the Bush is going to get some help out of this. The one area of the state that I think is probably not really going to get any help out of it is actually going to be Southeast. And that's because most of their stuff comes out of Seattle or the Pacific Northwest anyway, because it's closer, it's cheaper, it's faster. And they've got a bunch of hydropower down here. So they've got cheap electricity for the most part. And you're not going to ship natural gas from Cook Inlet over to over here to Southeast. So
yeah, they would, if they were going to be getting LNG, it would be coming from Canada because it's right next door.
Exactly. Yeah. You got that Kitimat project that's just a little way south of Ketchikan, which started operations last year and is currently going through a feed process to decide if they're going to expand and go to phase 2, which in 3 or 4 years is going to double their capacity. Most likely they're going to do that because they're already seeing how well it's working for them in phase 1. So once their phase 2 hits, then there's just going to be that much more gas coming.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think we're going to call it on listening to Enstar here. I think we've gotten the gist of this. And I just want to reiterate that if you're watching this broadcast now, or if you're watching the recording, the last 10 minutes of the show should be all that you need to know in order to get a hold of your legislator and talk to your gubernatorial candidates, right? The cost of energy. And this is something, I guess it's a moot point. I just thought of this, right? The problem is going to work itself out in the next few weeks. You don't have months. If they don't fix something here in this session or in a second special session, then you don't have a project and you don't have a way to get your costs reduced in the long term. Yeah. So your influence has to happen right now to your legislators.
Yeah. We heard some information from the governor's office shortly before the regular session ended that leads me to think that if we do not have this thing locked down, you know, definitely everything on our end of it, the legislature's end of it, done by August, if not everything on Glenfarne's end as well, in terms of getting those contracts finally locked down. By about sometime in August, then we're missing the boat on this project. You're going to have a lot of changes in the world market in terms of price of steel and things like that, where they need to get all of that stuff locked down now. If otherwise the prices are going to go through the roof on everything they need. And then you want to talk about cost overruns. Well, you're going to have to redo the entire thing from the ground up. So that's roughly where we're sitting.
The other one more nail in the coffin of people wanting to stay in Alaska, right? This Port of Alaska expansion project has not fully materialized in additional costs for goods coming into Alaska, as it will here in the near term. And if you don't have a gas pipeline and you see a 20% increase in goods, food, everything that comes in through the port, this is going to be a very sad place. Because I mean, at the end of the day, what it's pointing to is we cannot manage ourselves. We can't manage to keep a port from falling into the water over the decades. We can't manage to build a pipeline and take care of our own energy needs. And we're a net positive recipient of federal dollars flowing into this state for all of the social programs that we need federal government to keep spending money on. Like, we are unable to take care of ourselves, and we are proving the naysayers correct back at the formation of this state when Congress very narrowly admitted us to the Union. There was almost half of the legislature, the Congress was like, no, Alaska is going to become a dependent of the federal government.
Yeah, and we already were, so why would they give up the power? Yeah,
here we are.
The series of articles that I wrote for the Alaska Story for Suzanne Downing at the beginning of the year, one of them was specifically about why don't we build things in this state? And I addressed it in two ways because it's a slightly different answer for the public sector stuff and the private sector stuff. The public sector stuff, the reason we don't build things and we don't maintain things is because we have decided to turn construction projects into a way to shovel pork back home to support construction jobs for a year or two, for a summer or two, in order to get myself reelected. And we're not looking at, hey, let's spend some money on this construction project that's actually going to help the economy over the next 10 or 20 years. And I'm not necessarily going to see those benefits while I'm in elected office, but the guy that's in office after me will see those benefits. But that's not our mindset around here, because that's not what we use our budget for, because we don't care about the economy. On the other side, the reason that the private sector doesn't build significant things in this state, things that we could build that could transform our economy, part of it is issues of economies of scale and small population, large state, things like that. And those things are hard, and we're going to have to deal with them. But part of it is because, again, since the legislature doesn't care about the economy, we have not proven ourselves to be good business partners, where you're not going to get halfway through the project and we're going to change the terms of the deal on you again. When we were in the resources committee, Senator Giesel brought up that, back about 2012 or so, as John was mentioning earlier, to deal with the issues in Cook Inlet gas, we here in the legislature, I wasn't here at the time, neither were you, passed a whole bunch of tax credits aimed at Cook Inlet to get them to incentivize production. And then about 2017 or so, for whatever reason, I don't know, it worked. That more product, BP sold all their stuff to Hillcorp, and Hillcorp started drilling a bunch of wells. But the legislature decided, for whatever reason, to renege and cut back on those tax credits, and it caused serious problems for companies trying to drill in Cook Inlet. And that's part of where Hex came from, is because it bankrupted a company, and then Hex bought the stuff out of it. So that's the type of business partner that we are. If we want the private sector to come in and build some of these large infrastructure projects that, serve the export market too, but also serve in state, then we have to be able to be a good business partner over the course of not just a couple of legislative sessions, but over the course of decades. And we're not there yet.
Yep. All right, Rob, sure appreciate you coming on and helping give some insight and a different perspective. Look forward to one day you and I being able to commiserate on the 6-year club for spending the time in the doing our time down in Juneau.
Next time I'm down in Nikiski, I'll stop in and say hi.
Please do. I don't know how often you drive truck down this way, but
I don't make it to Nikiski very often, but I've ended up down in Kenai a few times. There's some suppliers down there that trade equipment with some guys on the slope, and same thing down in Anchor Point.
Well, you stand to gain quite a bit of business if they build a pipeline, right?
Oh yeah, you kidding? When with Willow and Pika kicking off, when they kicked off over the course of about 3 years, the money I made driving truck went up by about 60%, honestly, over that time period. Now it's kind of flattened out because things are slowing down on the slope, and we don't need it's not as hard to find drivers. But if this thing kicks off, I'm going to make a ton of money driving. I know that there's going to be another driver shortage in this state. There's going to be another truck shortage in this state, and I'm going to be begging for days off. is really what it's going to boil down
You're going
to.
to declare a conflict of interest on this vote?
Oh, you know what I should have done is I should have declared a conflict of interest on the pension vote, because theoretically I could then get a pension from the state.
Yeah.
But that's that's what I should have done. But
All right, Rob. You have a good rest of the evening, and good luck tomorrow. We'll catch up with you again. Appreciate you joining us. Folks, thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for all the questions and participating. Please, if there's ever been a show that needs to get shared, especially the last 15 minutes of the show, this is it. So like and share, subscribe, send a copy and paste this link to somebody that needs to understand what's happening with this pipeline and what's going to happen with their cost of their energy. It matters. And that's the other thing too we didn't talk about is the impacts to your business or your employer with the additional cost of electricity, right? It just makes everything harder, more expensive.
I mean, most of us think about, price of groceries, things like that. How much do I have no idea how to find this out, but how much do they have to add to the price of groceries because of how expensive it's getting to heat, Walmart and Freddy's and all those places?
Yep. All right. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow night. Adios.